The lone figure sat motionless at the back of the grand hall, partially obscured by shadows. His ash-gray coat blended with the dim lighting, making him almost invisible to the casual observer. But everyone in the Chaos Council knew he was there. They could feel his presence, a solitary human among dozens of alien delegates, seemingly insignificant yet commanding an unspoken fear that permeated the chamber. The Tanyar galaxy had changed drastically since the Great Legion War. Former planetary alliances had crumbled, leaving power concentrated in the hands of the Galactic Council. Here on Araxia Prime, a frontier planet serving as the capital of the border regions, political factions, military strategists, and criminal enterprises crowded the neon-lit streets and towering structures. Tonight's gathering was particularly tense. The Chaos Council, a shadow organization comprised of the galaxy's most influential non-governmental powers, had convened in their headquarters, a gleaming spire known as the House of Chaos. Representatives from various species sat around a massive circular table of polished stone, their faces illuminated by the soft blue glow emanating from the center. Darian, Cav, Rylan remained in his corner, observing. No one knew much about his past, though rumors suggested he was a master assassin who had interfered in numerous government coups across the galaxy. What everyone did know was that he was dangerous, the only human deemed worthy of a seat in this particular assembly. The year was 2492, several months after the Galactic Council had seized control of the Greater Orion armor system. The political climate remained unstable, alliances constantly shifting beneath a veneer of diplomatic pleasantries. "The Galactic Authority has overstepped its boundaries for the last time," declared the Draken representative, his scaled face contorting with barely contained rage. "They've seized our mining operations in the Orion sector without proper compensation. This cannot stand." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The representative continued, his voice growing more passionate. "We must consider a coordinated response. Perhaps it's time to remind them that not all power in this galaxy flows through their chambers." As he spoke, Cav noticed subtle shifts in the room's atmosphere. Tension thickened the air, like invisible smoke. The Zen Energy Federation ambassador fidgeted with her luminescent robes, while the semi-bestial Holgrax Vorn of the Terry Alliance system leaned forward, clawed hands clasped in apparent interest. At the far end of the table sat Cardinal Min Tritola, the representative of the Path Purification Order, a religious faction that had gained considerable influence in recent decades. The Cardinal's pale face remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as the Draken representative spoke of rebellion. Suddenly, a shrill alarm pierced the chamber. Red lights flashed across the ceiling's mirrored surface, reflecting chaotically around the room. Confusion erupted as security protocols activated, sealing all exits. "What's happening?" demanded Terran Vost of the Zen Energy Federation, rising from her seat. The answer came in the form of a gurgling sound from the main table. All eyes turned to Hyrule Phantom Zant, a key council member and longtime negotiator between factions. A thin blade protruded from his chest, blood pooling on the marble surface beneath him. His eyes widened in shock before he slumped forward, body convulsing. Chaos erupted. Accusations flew across the chamber as delegates backed away from the table, some reaching for concealed weapons. "This is an outrage!" bellowed the Draken representative, scales flaring in anger. "Hyrule was eliminated for daring to challenge your sovereignty." He pointed an accusatory claw at the Zen Federation delegation. "Us? We had nothing to gain from this," Terran Vost shouted back, her skin glowing brighter in agitation. As the delegates argued, few noticed Cav rise from his seat and approach the body. He moved with silent efficiency, examining the wound with clinical detachment. The knife was of unique design, a ceremonial blade typically used by Dracon assassins. Yet, something about it seemed off. The room fell silent as they suddenly realized the lone human, the one they all secretly feared, was handling evidence of the assassination. Every eye tracked his movements as he carefully removed a small pendant from Hiro's neck, examining it under the pulsing emergency lights. Cav turned the pendant over, his experienced eyes catching the subtle marks of nano-manipulation on its surface. The Draken seal had been carefully altered, almost imperceptibly. This wasn't Draken work at all, but someone had gone to great lengths to make it appear so. Someone wanted to frame the Draken alliance. The human should explain himself. Cardinal Tola's voice cut through the silence. Perhaps he knows more than he reveals. Cav pocketed the pendant and stepped back from the body, his face betraying nothing. This was no Draken assassination, he said simply, his voice low, yet carrying across the chamber. The blade is ceremonial, but the technique is wrong. Draken assassins strike from behind, not from above. The Draken representative's eyes widened slightly. He speaks truth, he admitted reluctantly. This is a fabrication meant to implicate us. Before further discussion could ensue, the security systems blared again. The main display showed armed figures breaching the lower levels of the building. Masked assailants, announced the security AI. Unknown affiliation. They appear to be targeting the council chamber. Terran Vost turned to Cav. Her luminescent features hardened with suspicion. You were the only one near the body. This could be your doing. Perhaps these attackers are your associates. I suggest a truth offering, she continued. Surrender yourself for questioning. Prove your innocence. Cav's expression remained neutral, but his mind raced through calculations. Someone had carefully orchestrated this assassination to trigger interspecies conflict. Now, they were sending cleanup crews to eliminate witnesses, specifically him, the lone observer who had spotted the deception. The human has connections to the Human Resurgence Group, Cardinal Tola interjected, his thin lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps it's time we investigate their involvement in this tragedy. The Human Resurgence, a radical organization advocating for human supremacy in the galaxy, had been designated as a terrorist group decades ago. The accusation was a calculated move to isolate Cav further. We should suspend all trade discussions and focus on internal investigation, growled Holgrax Vorn, his fur bristling. No one leaves until we determine responsibility. As the council descended into further argument, Cav slipped away toward a service corridor. He had memorized the building's layout years ago, including the secret escape tunnels, known only to select Chaos Council members. Moving through the shadows, he evaded the building's automated security systems with practiced ease. The emergency had triggered lockdown protocols, but Cav knew the override sequences. He reached a maintenance shaft and descended rapidly, hearing distant sounds of combat as the masked attackers engaged with the building's security forces. 20 minutes later, he emerged several blocks away through an old supply tunnel. The neon glow of Araxia Prime's nightlife cast multicolored shadows across his face as he pulled his gray coat tighter around his shoulders. A planet-wide alert would soon be issued for his capture, and every surveillance system would be scanning for his biometric signature. Cav headed toward the Eastern Oasis District, a labyrinthine neighborhood where surveillance was spotty and bribes could buy temporary anonymity. He maintained a safe house there, one of several across the planet, where he kept emergency supplies and secure communication equipment. The apartment was small and Spartan, hidden behind a facade of a maintenance worker's quarters. Once inside, Cav activated the electromagnetic shielding and retrieved a secure data drive from a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. The drive contained information on the Human Resurgence movement, not because he was a member, as Cardinal Tola had implied, but because he had been tracking their activities for years. Their extremism had always threatened the fragile interspecies peace Cav had worked to maintain. He inserted the pendant he'd taken from Hyrule into a scanner. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing magnified images of the nano-manipulation marks, running the signature through his database. He found a match. Proprietary nanotechnology used exclusively by Ion Forge Industries, a powerful corporation headquartered in the Kithrin Kingdom. Interesting connection, he muttered to himself, analyzing the data patterns. Before he could investigate further, his security system flashed a warning. Someone was approaching, 3 figures moving with the coordinated precision of professional killers. The masked assassins had tracked him faster than expected. Cav dimmed the lights and retrieved a compact pulse weapon from his arsenal. Taking position beside the window, he watched as the first assailant approached the door, scanning for traps. The attack came swiftly. A silent explosive device disintegrated the lock, and 3 figures in metallic masks poured into the apartment. Cav fired twice, hitting the first attacker in the shoulder. The second attacker leaped forward with inhuman speed, clearly augmented with combat implants, while the third laid down covering fire. Cav rolled behind a partition, narrowly avoiding a burst of plasma fire that scorched the wall behind him. He countered with a flash grenade, temporarily blinding the attackers before engaging in close combat. The fight was brutal and efficient. Cav disarmed the wounded assailant and used him as a shield against the third attacker's fire. A swift strike to the second attacker's neural implant temporarily paralyzed him. The third hesitated just long enough for Cav to close the distance and deliver a precision blow to the attacker's throat. With 2 assassins incapacitated and 1 struggling to breathe, Cav seized his opportunity. He pinned the gasping attacker against the wall. "Who sent you?" he demanded, pressing a neural disruptor against the assassin's temple. The masked figure resisted, but the neural disruptor's effects loosened his resolve. Hyrule knew too much, he gasped. Had to silence him, before anyone discovered the dark operations. "What operations? Who hired you?" "Orders came through, encrypted channels. Something about nanobots." Hyrule found out about the prototype. Before Cav could extract more information, the assassin's eyes widened in pain. His body convulsed violently. A kill switch had been activated remotely. Within seconds, the assassin was dead, along with his 2 companions who suffered the same fate simultaneously. Cav searched their bodies quickly, finding little except standardized equipment with identification markers removed. These were professional cleaners, likely hired through multiple proxies to maintain deniability. Gathering only essential equipment and the data on Hyrule's pendant, Cav evacuated the safe house. The authorities would arrive soon, and he needed to disappear. His next move was risky, but necessary. He needed to contact General Rakelis of the Draken Alliance, the one Draken official with both the influence and motivation to investigate the frame job against his people. Using encrypted channels and old military frequencies, Cav sent a brief message requesting a secure meeting. The response came an hour later, coordinates for a rendezvous at an abandoned trading post in the industrial sector. The area was desolate, illuminated only by the distant glow of the city and occasional flashes from malfunctioning lighting systems. Cav approached cautiously, scanning for surveillance or traps. He detected 4 life forms inside the designated building, more than expected, but not necessarily hostile. General Rakelis waited inside, flanked by 3 Draken guards whose ceremonial armor identified them as members of the Royal Protection Unit. The general's scales gleamed dully in the low light, their natural iridescence subdued by age and battle scars. "I wondered when you would reach out. Human," Rakelis said, his voice a low rumble. "You've been declared the primary suspect in Hyrule's assassination." "By whom?" Cav asked, remaining near the exit. "Officially. The Chaos Council has requested your detention for questioning. Unofficially, Cardinal Tola has convinced half the delegates that you're a human resurgence operative." Cav nodded. "Convenient scapegoat, but you wouldn't have agreed to meet if you believed that." The general's scaled lips twitched in what might have been a smile. The blade was Draken ceremonial, but the technique was wrong. You noticed immediately. Few non-Draken would recognize such details. I've studied many things, Cav replied simply. Reckless dismissed his guards with a gesture, ordering them to secure the perimeter. Once alone with Cav, his demeanor changed slightly, less formal, more direct. Why did you contact me, human? Our species have little reason to trust each other. Cav produced the pendant, projecting its data into the space between them. Someone is framing the Draken Alliance for Hiral's assassination. The nanosignatures point to Ion Forge Industries, a corporation with significant investments in the Path Purification Order's military operations. The general studied the projection carefully. Ion Forge has supplied weapons to multiple factions, including my own. But these nanomarkers... He paused, leaning closer. These are from their classified division. Few outside the highest military circles should even know they exist. Hiral knew, Cav said, and it got him killed. What are you proposing? A temporary alliance. I need access to Dracon intelligence networks to track the connection between Ion Forge and Cardinal Tola. You need to clear your people of assassination charges. Rakhalis considered this, his reptilian features unreadable. Finally, he nodded. The Draken Alliance has suffered enough from false accusations. If Cardinal Tola is conspiring with Ion Forge, we want proof. He extended a scaled hand. We have an agreement, Cav. As they confirmed details of their arrangement, Cav's monitoring devices detected movement outside, a patrol of Araxian security forces approaching the building. We've been tracked, Cav said, checking his weapons. The meeting location was compromised. Reckless growled in frustration. My diplomatic immunity should protect us. Not if they're operating under Cardinal Tola's influence. The Path Purification Order has been infiltrating security forces across the sector. They moved quickly, exiting through a maintenance tunnel as security forces surrounded the building. Rakhalis and his guards separated from Cav, heading toward the Draken embassy while providing a distraction. Cav had a different destination in mind. If Ion Forge was involved with Hiral's assassination and specialized nanobots, he needed historical context. The ancient Oralin Network Library contained archived records of corporate activities going back centuries, including Ion Forge's early connections to the Black Flag faction during the Great Legion War. The library was located in Araxia Prime's historic district, a collection of preserved buildings from the original colonial era. Security there was minimal, the facility considered too outdated to merit significant protection. Cav accessed the library through a service entrance, using credentials from his days as a researcher, one of many cover identities he had maintained over the years. The interior was dimly lit, filled with rows of data servers and holographic interfaces that had been outdated for decades, but maintained for historical preservation. He located the corporate archives section and began his search, scanning through Ion Forge's public history. The corporation had started as a small weapons manufacturer before expanding into biotechnology and security systems after the war. Their most profitable division now specialized in species-specific medical technologies, treatments and enhancements tailored to different alien physiologies. Digging deeper into classified records required bypassing several security measures. But Cav's experience made quick work of them. He discovered sealed files referring to Project Species Equilibrium, a classified initiative from 15 years ago that had been officially terminated after ethical concerns were raised by regulatory agencies. The project documents were heavily redacted, but Cav found references to targeted nanoagents designed to interact with specific genetic markers. In essence, Ion Forge had been developing nanobots that could identify and target particular species while leaving others unaffected. Weapons of selective genocide, Cav murmured, downloading the files to a secure device. Before he could complete his research, the library's ancient security system pinged an alert. Someone else had entered the facility, multiple someones, moving with tactical precision. Cav deactivated the terminal and moved deeper into the stacks, using the labyrinthine arrangement of servers for cover. Through gaps in the equipment, he spotted 3 figures in security uniforms, but their movements were too coordinated for regular guards. The masked assassins had found him again. He needed to escape with the information he'd gathered. The files provided the connection he needed, proof that Ion Forge had developed technology capable of species-specific targeting. If Cardinal Tola had acquired this technology, he could potentially enact the Path Purification Order's most extreme doctrine, the elimination of all non-human species. Moving silently between server banks, Cav approached the rear exit. He was nearly there when a 4th assassin emerged from the shadows, metal mask gleaming in the dim light. Cav reacted instantly, catching the assassin's weapon arm and forcing it upward as it discharged, sending a plasma bolt into the ceiling. They grappled briefly before Cav delivered a precise strike to the attacker's neural cluster, temporarily paralyzing him. The commotion alerted the other assassins, who converged on his position. Cav grabbed a server unit and hurled it into their path, causing a cascade of equipment to fall. In the confusion, he slipped through the emergency exit and disappeared into the labyrinth of alleyways surrounding the historic district. Over the next 48 hours, Auraxia Prime descended into a state of heightened tension. The Chaos Council issued formal condemnations of Cav and the Human Resurgence movement, placing a substantial bounty on his capture. Meanwhile, Cardinal Tola made public appearances calling for increased security measures against radical human elements. Cav moved between safe houses, analyzing the information he'd gathered while maintaining encrypted communication with General Rakalis. The Draken intelligence network had uncovered additional connections between Ion Forge and the Path Purification Order, specifically, large financial transfers coinciding with the development of a new purification initiative. "They're planning something imminent," Rakalis reported during one secure transmission. "Our sources indicate Ion Forge has activated a dormant facility in the Dead Zone district, an area officially condemned after industrial contamination." "That's where they'd keep the prototype," Cav concluded. "Away from regulatory oversight and civilian witnesses." "My people have also located something unexpected," the general continued. "Biometric signals matching Hero Zant have been detected within the facility." "Hero's alive?" Cav asked, surprised. "Not exactly. The signals are fragmented, as if parts of him are functioning, but not a complete organism. They may have preserved him for information extraction." The implications were disturbing. Ion Forge possessed technology to maintain consciousness in a technically deceased subject, presumably to extract information that died with them. "We need to infiltrate that facility," Cav decided. "But security will be extreme." "The Draken Alliance cannot officially participate," Rakalis warned. "But I can provide certain assets that aren't traceable to us." "I might have additional support," Cav said hesitantly. "Though it's not without complications." The complications were the human resurgence. While Cav had never supported their supremacist ideology, he had maintained contacts within the organization to monitor their activities. Now, he needed their resources, specifically, their knowledge of Auraxia Prime's underground tunnel system, which included passages beneath the Dead Zone, where Ion Forge's facility was located. Contacting them was risky. The Resurgence would view his request with suspicion, potentially seeing it as an opportunity to capture him for their own purposes. Yet, he had little choice. Using an old emergency protocol, Cav arranged a meeting with a Resurgence cell leader, known as Sentinel. The rendezvous took place in an abandoned water reclamation plant in the lower levels of the city, far from surveillance systems. Sentinel arrived with 4 armed guards, their faces obscured by polarized visors. Their leader was a tall woman with military bearing and a facial scar that suggested past combat experience. "The infamous Cav," she said, studying him carefully. "Half our people think you're a traitor to humanity. The other half believe you're our secret leader." "Both are wrong," Cav replied evenly. "Yet here you are, seeking our help. Curious timing, with every security force in the sector hunting you." Cav explained his discovery: Ion Forge's species-targeting nanobots, and their connection to Cardinal Tola's Path Purification Order. He carefully omitted his alliance with the Draken, knowing it would immediately end any chance of cooperation. "You're suggesting Cardinal Tola plans to use these nanobots against non-humans?" Sentinel asked, skepticism evident in her voice. "Yes, but there's more," Cav continued. "The technology doesn't discriminate between allies and enemies. Once deployed, it could target any non-human species, including those humans depend on for trade, resources, and mutual defense. Some would call that a feature, not a flaw," Sentinel remarked coldly. "Those people fail to understand galactic economics. Humans are outnumbered 1,000 to 1. If every other species were eliminated, the survivors would hunt us to extinction for revenge." This pragmatic argument seemed to resonate more than any moral appeal. Sentinel conferred briefly with her lieutenants before turning back to Cav. "What exactly do you need from us?" "Access to the tunnel network beneath the dead zone, specifically entry points near the Ion Forge facility." Sentinel considered this. "We can provide that, along with a small tactical team. But we want something in return." "What?" "All data on the nanobot technology. If it exists, we want to understand it. For defensive purposes." Cav knew this was a dangerous concession. In the wrong hands, even defensive knowledge could be repurposed. But he needed their assistance. "Agreed, but I control the data until the mission is complete." They finalized plans for infiltrating the Ion Forge facility the following night. The Resurgence would provide access to the tunnels and a small support team, while Cav coordinated with Raquelis for additional distraction and intelligence. As the meeting concluded, Sentinel approached Cav privately. "One question," she said quietly. "Why do you care what happens to non-humans? You've spent years distancing yourself from Resurgence ideology, yet you still operate alone. What's your actual motivation?" Cav considered the question. "Balance," he finally answered. "The galaxy functions because no single species can dominate all others. Upset that balance, and everything collapses." Whether Sentinel believed him or not, she nodded acceptance and departed with her team, leaving Cav to make final preparations for the infiltration. The Dead Zone lived up to its name, a desolate area of abandoned industrial complexes and contaminated land where few ventured willingly. Ion Forge's facility was disguised as a decommissioned waste processing plant. Its true purpose hidden behind radiation warning signs and automated security systems. Cav rendezvoused with the Resurgence team at a maintenance shaft 3 kilometers from the facility. Sentinel had provided 6 operatives, all equipped with stealth gear and familiar with the tunnel network. Raquelis had separately arranged for a regulatory inspection of another Ion Forge property across the city, drawing away some security personnel. They descended into the tunnels, ancient service corridors dating back to the original colony, now expanded by various factions for clandestine movement across the city. The air was stale, tinged with chemical odors from the contaminated soil above. The facility should be directly overhead in approximately 800 meters. The Resurgence navigator informed them, checking a holographic map projected from a wrist device. "There's an old emergency access shaft that should provide entry to their lower levels." As they approached the access point, Cav received an encrypted message from Raquelis. "Cardinal Tola has left the Purification Cathedral with a security detail. Trajectory suggests he's heading toward your location. Exercise extreme caution." The timing wasn't coincidental. Cardinal Tola was personally overseeing something at the facility, something significant enough to risk leaving his heavily fortified cathedral. The access shaft was sealed with a modern security panel, evidence that Ion Forge knew about the tunnel's existence. One of the Resurgence operatives, a specialist in electronic warfare, attached a bypass device to the panel. After several tense minutes, the security system disengaged, and the heavy door slid open. They ascended into the facility's lowest level, a storage area filled with containment units and laboratory equipment. The space appeared deserted, but active status lights on various systems indicated the facility was fully operational. "We need to find the central research area," Cav instructed. "Look for secured laboratories or restricted access points." The team split into pairs to cover more ground efficiently. Cav partnered with Sentinel, moving through the dimly lit corridors with weapons ready. They encountered no personnel, unusual for an active facility, suggesting either minimal staffing or a recent evacuation. "Something's wrong," Sentinel whispered as they approached a heavily reinforced door marked Special Repository. "This is too easy," Cav agreed. Either they'd been extraordinarily fortunate, or they were being allowed to proceed into a trap. Either way, the repository likely contained what they sought. The door required biometric authentication. Using specialized equipment provided by Rakelis, Cav bypassed the security by simulating authorized neural patterns, a technique that fooled the system into registering an approved user. The repository beyond was unlike anything they had expected. Instead of weapons or conventional research equipment, the chamber contained dozens of suspension tanks, each housing what appeared to be partial biological specimens, organs, tissue samples, and in some cases, nearly complete bodies preserved in luminescent fluid. "What is this place?" Sentinel breathed, visibly disturbed despite her usual composure. Cav approached one of the central tanks, wiping condensation from its surface. Inside floated a familiar figure, Hyrule Zant, his body appearing mostly intact, but with sections of his skull and torso replaced by transparent panels, revealing cybernetic components. "They're keeping him alive," Cav observed. "Or at least, parts of him." A soft humming sound drew their attention to a separate chamber at the far end of the repository. Inside, behind transparent barriers, was an elaborate production system. Automated fabricators constructing microscopic devices and injecting them into biological media. "The nanobot production facility," Cav confirmed, scanning the system with his equipment. "They're programming them with genetic targeting parameters." Sentinel examined the control interfaces. These targeting specifications, they're set to affect nearly all non-human physiologies. Before they could investigate further, alarms blared throughout the facility. Security systems activated, sealing exits and initiating containment protocols. "We've been discovered," Sentinel warned, signaling her team to converge on their position. The repository's main entrance slid open, admitting a contingent of masked assassins, the same type that had pursued Cav since Hyrule's assassination. Behind them strode Cardinal Tola himself, his ceremonial robes replaced by a more practical combat suit, though he still wore his religious insignia prominently. "The elusive Cav," the Cardinal said, his thin lips curving into a smile. "And members of the human resurgence. How convenient to find you all in one location." More figures entered behind him, security personnel wearing Ion Forge insignia, along with several individuals in laboratory attire. "You've discovered our little project ahead of schedule," Tola continued, gesturing toward the nanobot production facility. "Though I suppose it's fitting that representatives of humanity should witness the dawn of a new era." "An era of genocide," Cav responded, assessing their tactical options. The other resurgence operatives were making their way to the repository, but would be intercepted by security forces. Tola shook his head. "Not genocide, purification. The galaxy has become contaminated with lesser species, diluting humanity's rightful dominance. These nanobots will simply restore balance." "By eliminating all non-human life," Sentinel interjected. "Only the beginning stages," Tola explained with disturbing calm. "The initial deployment will target specific populations, starting with the Draken Alliance, whose military power represents the greatest threat to human expansion." As if on cue, The facility's rear entrance opened, revealing General Rakelis and a squad of Draken commandos. They had infiltrated separately, likely using Draken intelligence to access the facility through a different route. The situation escalated instantly. Ion Forge security forces and the masked assassins turned to confront the new threat, while Cardinal Tola backed toward the nanobot production chamber, protected by his personal guards. "Kill them all!" Tola ordered. "Secure the prototype!" Combat erupted across the repository. The Resurgence operatives engaged Ion Forge security, while Rakelis and his Dracon commandos targeted the masked assassins. Caught between multiple factions, Cav faced a critical decision: pursue Tola and stop the nanobot deployment, or secure Hyrule and the evidence of Ion Forge's conspiracy. In the chaos, Cav reached for a small device in his coat, a miniature EMP generator he had prepared specifically for this contingency. It would temporarily disable all electronic systems in the immediate vicinity, including security measures and possibly the nanobot containment fields. "Cover me!" he shouted to Sentinel as he activated the device. A pulse of electromagnetic energy surged through the repository. Lights flickered and died, security systems deactivated, and electronic locks disengaged. In the sudden darkness, emergency backup systems cast an eerie red glow across the chamber. The nanobot production facility's containment field collapsed, its control systems offline. Cardinal Tola shouted in alarm as his guards scrambled to secure the prototype containers. Cav moved through the darkness with practiced efficiency, navigating toward Hiral's suspension tank. The EMP had disrupted its life support systems, but auxiliary mechanical backups had engaged, a failsafe to prevent accidental termination of subjects. Hiral's eyes flickered open as consciousness returned to his partially preserved form. He seemed to recognize Cav, his lips moving slightly, though no sound emerged. Meanwhile, Rakelis and his Draken forces pressed their advantage, their natural night vision giving them superiority in the dimmed conditions. They pushed back Tola's guards, securing the nanobot production chamber. Sentinel and her Resurgence operatives engaged in fierce close-quarters combat with the masked assassins. Despite their training, the Resurgence fighters suffered casualties, 2 operatives down within the first minutes of fighting. Cav worked quickly to stabilize Hyrule's condition, connecting his equipment to the tank's mechanical backup systems. Hyrule's consciousness strengthened, and he managed to communicate through weak gestures toward a control panel on his tank. Understanding, Cav accessed the panel, finding a data interface. Hyrule had stored information within his cybernetic components, including access codes to the nanobot control protocols. He knew, Cav realized. He discovered their plan and stored the evidence inside himself. That's why they needed to preserve him. With Hyrule's access codes, Cav could potentially neutralize the nanobots, render them inert before they could be deployed. He transferred the data to his device and turned his attention back to the battle raging around them. Cardinal Tola had retreated to a defensive position near the rear entrance, surrounded by his remaining guards. He wielded an ornate plasma sword, a ceremonial weapon of the Path Purification Order, modified for actual combat. "You cannot stop the purification," Tola shouted across the chamber. "The prototype is already complete. Even if you destroy this facility, the knowledge exists." Rakelis advanced toward Tola, wielding a traditional Dracon combat staff. "Your purification ends here, Cardinal," the general growled. "Your conspiracy with Ion Forge will be exposed to the Galactic Council." Tola laughed. "The Council? Half its members are already sympathetic to our cause. Humanity's dominance is inevitable. We merely accelerate the natural order." Their confrontation escalated into direct combat. Tola's plasma sword against Rakelis's combat staff. The Cardinal fought with surprising skill for a religious leader, his movements suggesting military training beneath his pious exterior. Cav focused on the nanobot control systems, using Hyrule's access codes to initiate a shutdown sequence. The production machinery ground to a halt, containment fields stabilizing as emergency power rerouted to critical systems. "Sentinel!" Cav called across the chamber. "We need to secure the data archives. Everything about the project needs to be preserved as evidence." The Resurgence leader acknowledged, directing her remaining operatives to the facility's data center, adjacent to the main repository. They encountered heavy resistance from Ironforge security, but managed to breach the center and begin downloading critical files. As systems came back online, Cav accessed the facility's communication network. Using credentials extracted from Hiral's data, he established a connection to the Galactic Information Network, a direct line to public information channels across multiple star systems. Cardinal Tola, seeing what Cav intended, fought with renewed desperation against Rakelis. "Stop him!" he commanded his remaining forces. "He cannot be allowed to transmit." But it was too late. Cav had already begun the transmission, sending comprehensive data about Project Species Equilibrium to every major news outlet and governmental authority in the galaxy. Evidence of Ironforge's species-targeting nanobots, Cardinal Tola's involvement, and the Path Purification Order's genocidal plans spread across communication channels faster than any censorship could contain it. Realizing his defeat, Tola disengaged from combat with Rakelis and triggered a personal extraction beacon. "This isn't over," he snarled, as a transport signal locked onto his position. "The purification cannot be stopped, only delayed." Before anyone could prevent it, Tola and his remaining guards were extracted via emergency teleportation, a technology typically reserved for diplomatic emergencies, suggesting he had access to governmental resources beyond his religious position. With Tola gone, the remaining Ironforge security forces surrendered or retreated. The facility was secured, its deadly prototype contained, and its secrets exposed to the galaxy. In the aftermath, Cav stood with Rakelis and Sentinel amid the damaged repository, the suspension tanks casting an ethereal glow across their faces. "The Draken Alliance owes you a debt, human," Rakelis acknowledged formally. "You prevented what could have been the extinction of my species, and created significant problems for the Path Purification Order," Sentinel added, "though they'll deny involvement and sacrifice Ironforge as a scapegoat." Cav nodded. "Which is why we need to ensure Hiral survives to testify. His evidence is direct. He witnessed Cardinal Tola's meetings with Ironforge executives. Hiral's suspension tank had been stabilized, his consciousness preserved, though his body remained damaged beyond conventional medical repair. Draken physicians were already en route to transfer him to a more sophisticated life support system. "What happens now?" Sentinel asked, looking at the nanobot production facility, now deactivated but still intact. "The technology is too dangerous to preserve," Cav decided, "but equally dangerous to destroy without proper containment. The Draken have experience with hazardous material disposal." Rakelis confirmed this with a nod. "We will ensure it is dismantled safely. The knowledge of its creation is already spreading across the galaxy," Cav finished. "But knowledge of its weaknesses is spreading too." The transmission included countermeasures developed from Hiral's data. The political ramifications would be enormous. The Galactic Council would be forced to investigate Ironforge Industries and the Path Purification Order's connections. The Draken Alliance, cleared of assassination allegations, would regain diplomatic standing, and various planets would likely implement immediate embargoes against human-dominated worlds until the extent of involvement could be determined. As for Cav himself, his cover was irreparably blown. His face had been transmitted alongside the evidence, his role in exposing the conspiracy impossible to hide. He would need to disappear completely, assume a new identity in a distant star system. "What will you do?" Rakelis asked him, as they prepared to leave the facility. "What I've always done," Cav replied. "Disappear. Watch. Intervene when necessary." "The human resurgence could use someone with your skills," Sentinel suggested, though without much conviction. She knew Cav would never join their cause. Cav shook his head. Your organization needs to reconsider its fundamental ideology. Supremacy of any kind leads to this. He gestured at the nanobot facility, regardless of which species promotes it. In the days that followed, the galaxy responded with shock and outrage to the revealed conspiracy. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, issuing arrest warrants for Cardinal Tola and key Ion Forge executives. The Path Purification Order publicly disavowed Tola, claiming he had acted without authorization, though few believed this convenient distancing. Hyrule Zant was transferred to advanced medical facilities on the Draken homeworld, where specialized treatments offered hope for partial recovery. His testimony, delivered through technological assistance, provided crucial details about the conspiracy's origins and extent. General Rakulis, vindicated by the evidence, leveraged his enhanced standing to forge a new interspecies alliance, the Diversity Preservation Coalition, dedicated to preventing similar supremacist threats in the future. The human resurgence found itself under increased scrutiny, though Sentinel Cell was quietly exempted from investigation due to their role in exposing the plot. The experience had shaken some members' conviction in human supremacy, planting seeds of more moderate ideology. As for Darien Kav Rylan, he vanished from Araxia Prime aboard an unmarked transport, using identification credentials that would never be traced to his former identity. He left behind the gray coat that had been his signature in the Chaos Council, adopting new appearance and mannerisms that would render him unrecognizable. But throughout the galaxy, in shadowy meeting rooms where power brokers gathered, people began watching for the solitary figure who might appear in the corner, the lone human whose presence signified changes to come. For while Cav had disappeared from public view, the legend of his intervention grew with each retelling. Darien Cav, the only man who had intervened to prevent genocide, now hid among the stars. But those who watched for the silent figure sitting in the back of important chambers would remember. The one that every faction feared would appear again when the galaxy needed him most.